marks a national day without immigrants, a movement that organized after President Donald Trump first introduced his immigration executive order.
Since its inception, America has had strong ties with immigration. But how did we get to this topic becoming a polarizing hot-button debate? To answer this question, we can follow the dramatic shifts in immigration and society's view of immigrants since the settlement of North America.
We often forget that some of the most famous figures in American history were immigrants themselves. Christopher Columbus, Alexander Hamilton, and the Pilgrims all traveled from all parts of the globe in order to obtain better lives for themselves, whether it be for resources, religious freedom, or the glory of their country. The first large group of immigrants to come to America were the French and Spanish in the 1500s, followed by the English in the 1600s. The reaction of the current inhabitants, the Native Americans, is often overlooked by the history books. Because the immigrants held the power of advanced weaponry, the Native Americans were forced to either welcome the newcomers or perish at their hands. This is the only time in our history where the immigrants had more power than the current residents of the land, partially because this was before the creation of America and the implication of any laws. As white settlers continued to settle in the area that would become the United States, the establishment of slavery became more prominent. Due to the success of agriculture and harvesting of natural resources, colonists continued to support this forced form of immigration from West Africa. While these immigrants had no choice, they ultimately became an integral part of American culture.
The first wave of immigrants to America once it was established was caused by the Great Potato Famine in Ireland in 1845. The Irish fled their home country in search of a better life, especially regarding stable food supply. Most Irish immigrants lived in urban areas and were among the poorest in society. Because of this reputation, American citizens often discriminated and stereotyped those of Irish descent, immigrant or not. In 1848, California struck gold, creating a massive migration to the Golden State in search of riches. Americans crossed to the West Coast to find their fortune, but upon arrival, they were often met with Chinese immigrants with whom they would have to share the land. Americans did not appreciate the competition for jobs and wealth, or the extreme cultural differences between the Chinese citizens and Americans. Anti-immigration sentiments inspired American actions, such as the formation of the political party, the Know Nothings. This party's platform focused heavily on anti-immigration policies and gained enough popularity to have a presidential candidate run in the election of 1856. Following soon after that, the federal government passed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was supported by Californians who were unhappy with the influx of Chinese labor, lowering their wages. For the next 10 years, Chinese immigrants were barred from entering the United States. In 1892, Ellis Island was designated as the primary immigration point, marking an important distinction in American policy. Prior to this point, state governments had control over immigration preferences, but now the federal government held this power. Over Ellis Island stood the Statue of Liberty, and at her feet inscribed the message welcoming all immigrants. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The statue and poem became a symbol for the hope immigrants felt for the new life in America.
The late 1800s and the early 1900s were considered the third wave of immigration. Many Jews immigrated in order to avoid persecution in Europe. Most of the immigrants consisted of Europeans due to the fact that there were still significant restrictions for Chinese immigrants entering the country. Immigration peaked in 1907 with 1.3 million immigrants in just 1 year. This period of time was when the United States was industrializing, therefore creating more jobs. However, native-born Americans showed hostility towards Jewish immigrants, Catholics, and Japanese for taking away job opportunities. This developed into a widespread distrust of immigrants in America. Due to this distrust of immigrants, the United States government put harsh restrictions on immigrants. The Immigration Act of 1924 regulated the number of incoming immigrants to 2% of the total number of current Americans of each nationality. They used the 1890 census to base their numbers, therefore favoring Europeans and blockading Asians from entering the country. Immigration significantly declined during World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. After the war, the U.S. allowed refugees from the Soviet Union and Europe into the country. Additionally, Congress allowed Cuban refugees into the United States after the Communist Revolution. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 eliminated the quota system that was established in the 1920s. Immigration was now based on skill set and relatives living in the United States. This piece of legislation reduced the racist tendencies built into the previous immigration policy that favored Europeans. This act was an important step in America's history of immigration policy, moving toward a more equitable system. Since the late 1960s, the majority of immigrants coming to the United States are from Asia and Latin America. Presidents in office since this act was passed have both tried to crack down on deportation of illegal immigrants while worked to help legalize existing individuals and families who have immigrated. Obama implemented the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals policy, aiding immigrant children who were brought to the country illegally but raised in America, seen as one of the more progressive policies in recent past.
Similar to trends from the last 200 years, this new wave of immigration is met with disdain and xenophobia from existing American citizens. After the September 11th attacks, xenophobia and overall fear of immigrants increased dramatically, especially the fear of those practicing Islam and people from the Middle Eastern countries. Due to the increased presence of media covering politics and news, the issue of immigration and xenophobic sentiments has received more attention than it had in the past. Similarly to the mid-1800s, political parties began taking stances on the issue. However, instead of just a small third party supporting such aggressive anti-immigrant ideology, the Republican Party focused largely on this platform and subsequently gained a significant amount of support from those in the party. Donald Trump ran for president on a heavily anti-immigration platform, and his election to the office reflects how strongly many Americans agree with his ideas. In his campaign speeches, Trump focused on immigrants from Mexico and Latin America, whom he called, quote, rapists and drug dealers. This fear-mongering and name-calling both played off of and inspired fear of immigration's effects on society. Americans agreed with Trump's idea that immigrants are a harm to society, not an enrichment. They also resonated with his message of fearing immigrants and subsequently protecting Americans with his policies. Trump's policies reflect the American First mentality that has been shown throughout history. Americans, since the establishment of the nation, have feared immigrants taking jobs, changing society, and bringing harm to the nation. The election of Donald Trump is a clear indicator that these fears are powerful motivators for the American public. In the beginning of 2017, Donald Trump introduced the Executive Order 13769, titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States, which significantly reduced the amount of people allowed from Middle Eastern countries and banned indefinitely the admittance of Syrian refugees. Commonly but incorrectly known as the Muslim ban, this act was evidence of the fear of Middle Eastern immigrants and Muslim people from the American public. Trump has also moved to end DACA, which puts childhood immigrants at risk, even though they had previously been granted protection by the government. This act reflects Americans' desire to have an immigrant-free society.
As policy on immigration is continually changing and evolving, it is important to remember this nation's history and the principles on which it was founded. Immigrants initially came to this country seeking a better life and freedom from oppression. Over the course of history, Americans grew fearful of immigrants' effects on society and labor, and legislation reflected these sentiments by restricting immigration. Despite fear of the negative effects of immigration, Americans must remember that without immigration, this country would not exist.